what's the most tiny action that I can do right now that actually keeps me moving in the direction I want to move? Not being perfect or not having the most grand action, but what's the smallest one? The next one that could move you. There's an old saying, slow and steady wins the race. When I was younger, I truly used to think that phrase was about moving slower or moving slowly. But now, as I've gotten a little bit older, I think it's actually about something completely different. I think the core of that statement is truly about consistency because most of us don't have a problem starting something. I mean, that's the easy part because it's exciting, the dopamine's flowing and it's getting our interest, starting something. But the sustainability after you start is where the obstacle comes. And I know a lot of us have experienced it. If you haven't, good for you. So, you buy a journal, you create the plan, you get organized for it, or you sign up for something or whatever it is. And let's say you end up even opening a business, right? You get that far. And then you may not say it to anybody else, but you may say internally, you know what, this time it's probably going to be, it's going to be different. It feels different. And it is for a little while. You're trucking along, doing your thing, but then some element of life gets in your way. You miss a day becomes a week, and a week becomes, the story. And then somewhere along that pathway, maybe more dialogue happens internally. You may ask yourself why you always start that way, why you start strong, but you never actually finish it. So I don't think there's anything actually wrong with you. And it might not even be because you're lazy, but it certainly could be because you're consistently in the same pattern. So here's kind of some things I've been thinking about, as I create this video and as I speak on these topics. Instead of living slow and steady, we can get caught in something like I like to call the boom and bust cycle. During the boom, energized, the energy's at its highest point. You make big plans and you think about big change, but the reality is you can't change you can't change everything at once, all at once. And we convince ourselves this is the time is finally gonna stick. After so long, life gets in the way, like it always does, and those missed days pile up, and it's just not as exciting anymore. And it becomes, that boom is starting to become the bust. But it's not like you completely stop, and it's not that you don't care, it's not that you lack the interest, but that motivation, is maybe not carrying you as far as you hoped it would be. Then, as time passes, and things pile up, another week becomes another month. Maybe you get another boost of inspiration from somewhere, or maybe you're guilty enough because you haven't been following through, and then the cycle begins all over again. Kind of see that pattern? Call it the boom and bust cycle. One of the most common patterns you're going to see. You might be in that pattern right now. But the biggest frustration point is that that type of pattern can affect the way you see yourself, because every time it happens, it becomes a little bit easier to see yourself as the problem because you're the common denominator. And then the internal critic begins and it comes, maybe I'm not somebody who follows through. Maybe I'm not disciplined. Maybe I'm not meant to do what I'm doing. See how that can be really damaging, how, that can become the real problem. Maybe I'm the real problem in this equation. But what I want you to know is it's not your ability, it's the process maybe that you've been relying on, because we all want to be motivated. I want to be the most motivated person in the world. I want you to be the most motivated person in the world, but that can only carry us so far. And a lot of times motivation alone can't carry you to the finish line or whatever destination you have. You know, consistency is a little bit different. Consistency is not about consistently being inspired. It's asking a big question. And that question is, can you keep showing up after the exciting part's gone? So motivation may be hard to find. It could be hard to find every single day. So that self-trust really comes into the picture on the ordinary days, the regular days where nobody's watching, where it's boring, where there's no excitement. That's where the self-trust is built during those hours. You know? So I want to leave you with something to think about. Every time that self-trust breaks down or that consistency breaks down, the gap gets wider, you know, and the story that you may not be one that follows through or may not be one that is consistent or the one that starts something, never finishes, that story becomes a lot more clear and you believe that story more and more and more and you become more prone to repeating that pattern. And the more and more you begin to believe that story, and then the more and more you're likely to repeat that cycle over and over again. You know, so being able to show up anyway, despite how you feel, despite when the day's ordinary, despite when the day's boring, when nobody's watching you, right? Even when you feel like, you know what, you've worked for 2 or 3, 4 hours and there hadn't been much progress, you still are taking a step to closing the gap. You know, even if it's not obvious and it's not dramatic, the gap's closing with one ordinary decision at a time. Because every small decision you make every day, this is the opportunity for us all, either closes that gap or widens it, period. So I want to leave you with this as I close out this video. I want you to try this. The next time you feel super excited and then you feel the excitement fades on that end of it, as it's fading, don't ask, why am I not motivated about this? Instead, ask this, what's the most tiny action that I can do right now that actually keeps me moving in the direction I want to move? You know, not being perfect or not having the most grand action, but what's the smallest one? The next one that could move you, Because here's what people don't tell you. Consistency and self-trust is built one small, boring decision at a time. It's not going to be exciting most of the time. It's probably going to be boring most of the time. So, you know, I don't know what your goals are, you know, if you've established those type of goals, you know, and I don't know if it's about becoming more motivated or whatever the case may be, but I think we all want to be a person that continuously shows up slowly, steadily, one aligned decision at a time. I think we can all agree we probably have that goal because you don't have to close the gap all at one time. You don't have to close it all at one time. Maybe your gap's this big, maybe it's, who knows? Incremental progress and incremental change can help you slowly close the gap and move toward the person you want to become. And, you know, I talk about insight a lot. And if you're interested to continue gathering insight about yourself, you know, subscribe to the channel. Every week, multiple times a week, I explore why we get stuck and, you know, explore the gap between the person you are today and the person that you are hoping to become. I'm Darren. Move forward.